Singapore's labour market ended 2024 on a steady note, with resident employment growing in higher skilled sectors like healthcare. Layoffs were also lower than in 2023, even as overall job growth slowed in the last quarter. Here's a look at how the labour market advance estimates compare to previous years. Now, total employment growth for 2024 is expected to hit 45,500. This is a drop from the 78,800 increase the year before. Compared to 2019, which was before the COVID pandemic, total employment growth in 2024 is still around 10,000 less. Resident employment in higher skilled sectors grew, and these include sectors like professional services, financial services, and health and social services. The retail trade sector also saw an uptick due to year-end seasonal hiring. Meanwhile, non-resident employment growth slowed. Affected sectors include information and communications and insurance services. However, the construction sector saw an increase, largely driven by the hiring of work permit holders. Retrenchments dipped in 2024, although it remains higher than pre-COVID levels. The main reasons for layoffs were business reorganization or restructuring. The unemployment rate remained low. The overall rate is holding steady at 2%. Unemployment rates for residents and citizens increased slightly in late 2024, but was within typical non-recession levels. An analyst says the labour outlook remains positive for this year.
Singapore has ended the year with a strong note, and if we, account for the fact that Singapore's numbers have grown quite substantially, bereaved of the geopolitical as well as political, global noise, just the numbers alone, the momentum has been very encouraging, and that could actually continue to sustain into 2025.
The companies surveyed by the Manpower Ministry are optimistic about hiring and wage growth. However, one market watcher notes that global uncertainties and potential recessions could threaten job market growth. The challenge is how Singapore can maintain stability amid these external risks.
One digital marketing firm is aiming to stay competitive and has been rethinking its strategy. It's addressing disruptions from generative AI by upskilling staff, redefining roles, and even planning wage increases.
I have a staff, right? She's been with me about 3 years. She started off as a copywriter, then a digital marketing executive. Now she's 3 years in, going 4th year, right? I recently sent her for a project management professional course with NTUC Hub. She's getting ready to build a team under her.
Restructuring like this isn't unique. The MOM report shows that as Singapore's labour market improves, more companies are planning to hire and raise wages. In December last year, 46% of businesses plan to hire more workers in the coming months, up from the 43% a few months earlier. The number of companies that plan to raise wages also doubled in the same period. But the Manpower Ministry says Singapore's economy still faces uncertainty. To stay competitive, it says employers need to keep up with change and invest in upskilling their workforce.
Restructuring is not just about cutting costs, it's about aligning the workforce with the business future needs and opportunities. And we see this growth in companies' hiring expectations, right? Restructuring should be viewed as an opportunity to really optimize the organizational capacity and to really invest in human capital technology.
He says companies also need a clear long-term vision and focus on customer-centric processes. He adds that investments in technology and employee development are also crucial for firms to succeed.
And for more on this, we speak to Associate Professor Walter Theseira from the Singapore University of Social Sciences. Professor Theseira, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Job growth has slowed in the fourth quarter, even amid the year-end hiring compared to the previous quarter. Do you see this as a concern for the next quarter or for this year?
Well, if you take a step back, you look at the overall job numbers, unemployment is actually still low and stable. And that's especially when you contrast it to past recession periods like SARS, global financial crisis, or COVID. And actually, when you look at the job openings that are available, we still have more jobs open than job seekers. But that being said, right, it doesn't mean that everybody will get the job that they want. It's still going to be up to whether you have the skills that match the job as well as your expectations. For example, we can see that in some sectors like IT services, you still have actually job vacancies there, even though that's a sector that has well-known job churn or job loss recently. So that's because skill requirements can change very quickly. When that happens, you can have, open jobs even when people are being laid off. But that's the nature of the market today.
When we look at residents in fields like healthcare and financial services, Professor Theseira, essentially higher skills are needed for some segments in these areas. Do you think that's going to be a requirement for other roles as we become more dependent on tech?
Well, I think if you look at some of the areas of job growth recently, professional services, financial, health, and social services, it's really a mix, I think, catering to different types of skills. Some, of course, are our traditional strengths as an international business center. Others are really aimed at the aging population, right, catering to that. It is, of course, I think, the higher skilled jobs which help to drive growth. That's especially if if they happen to be in areas which are attracting a lot of interest and investment globally today, like AI technology. And that's important because with that investment of high global impact, that drives the overall economy here. But, I don't think it is the case that every Singaporean needs to be an AI scientist or to have the very highest part of the skills distribution. It's a misconception that the only good jobs are there. I think the whole idea is that, having these jobs located here will help to support demand for medium skilled jobs and, in areas that Singaporeans work in, and that will help to bring everybody up as well.
So not just AI, there are many new areas, but do you think that the local workforce is being trained fast enough in these new skills to move into the high-skilled jobs that are being created, or in what areas can we do better?
Well, this is actually quite a hard question to answer because we do need better measures actually of how we're training our workforce and how quickly they actually move into these job opportunities. We do actually have a number of strategies we have deployed to do this. Local universities and polytechnics, they've updated the course offerings, expanded intake in areas of demand like computer science. You have the entire continuing education and training framework that we have like Skills Future for the adult workforce, and of course you've got firms who are supported to do on-the-job training. But I want to say that the nature of skill requirements today is that it changes very quickly. There's always going to be this lag between what companies want, right, and what we are able to supply. So I think you cannot train your way out of it. What we actually want is to have a workforce which is more naturally adaptable and resilient. That is, we're all going to have the skills needed to learn in the job and self-direct what we should be learning for the next phase of our career. We cannot actually sit around and wait for the next course because it might be too late by then.
Where are we at when it comes to our reliance on foreigners for jobs, Professor Theseira?
Well, I think it is often talked about as, the job either goes to a foreigner or to a Singaporean. But I think that is not the best way to think about it. I think rather, if you have both of them together, that is actually going to drive economic growth. And, that's because when you have a new growth area, especially if it's an emerging area, we may not have that many Singaporeans who actually already have the skills to take up those jobs, and you cannot meet the demand of the industry fully. And then how do you attract those growth industries here while we're actually working to upskill and upgrade the local workforce? I think that's where you want to have careful use of high-skill immigration, because then the investors are convinced to anchor themselves here, even if the local workforce is not 100% there yet. But we do have to calibrate this very carefully. So recently, we have made some changes to employment pass system. It's prioritizing the higher end of skills. It's also penalizing companies who do not have enough Singaporeans or enough diversity in their workforce. And, this is to ensure that the companies who are here, they support the local workforce and they don't just rely on foreign talent.
There were 3,600 retrenchments in the last quarter of 2024. That's up from 3,050 in the previous quarter. Professor Theseira, how concerned should we be as we move into the new year?
Well, I think I would not look too much at retrenchment numbers quarter and quarter. That is because they can be quite lumpy, especially if a big firm has a layoff. I think the overall, the bigger story here is that local employment is still low and stable. But of course, I want to caution that it doesn't capture the concept of underemployment when Singaporeans feel that they're not in roles that use their skills, sufficiently or pay sufficiently. So I think we still have to keep thinking about how do we support our population to upskill and upgrade, especially mature workers who often suffer some challenges in the workforce. They may bear the brunt, for example, of job restructuring and so on. There's also, of course, the uncertainty due to changing global politics. But I think Singapore is trying to position itself to ride growth waves like AI, also changes in the global supply chain. It's never going to be an easy time in the global economy, but I think we can look forward to taking advantage of opportunities when they come up.
All right, always good to talk to you, Professor. Associate Professor Walter Theseira there from SUSS.